How's it going, producer? Thales here, and this is the first episode of How to Write Melody for a Pop Song. We already had the first episode of How to Write Lyrics for a Pop Song, which I'll link in the card on the top, but now it's time for melodies. And since this is the first video of the melody series, it's going to be a bit longer than the next ones because we'll first discuss how to write good melodies, then we'll analyze the song for today's episode, which is my latest release called Maybe We'd Be Together. Theory first, then I'll show you how I made it and why I made it that way. If you haven't heard the full song yet, I encourage you to pause now and do that first. It's also linked on the card and description of this video. Remember, the things we'll talk about today are not rules, they're guidelines, because making music is not an exact science, it's very subjective, alright? In my opinion, melody is the most important part of writing a song, especially in pop music. It's like the theme of your song, it's the most memorable element. Not the lyrics, not the harmony, the drums, the mix and the mastering, or even the marketing and promotion to your audience. It's the melody that will make people hum your song all day and remember you. So that's where I spend the most time in my songwriting. As songwriters, we need to hook the listener with a catchy and interesting melody, or else they'll get bored and stop listening. There's no point in having a great arrangement, a great mix, if we don't have a hook on the first place. Now, even though the melodies you make will reveal a lot of your personal taste, your musical background and your references, there are techniques to come up with catchy melodies. And you need to know first what kind of emotion you want to express. Is it going to be mostly a stable song, good vibes, good feelings, or is it an unstable song about something negative or sad? The melody, harmony, and rhythm and everything else in your song have to be cohesive with your lyrics to emphasize that main feeling, that's the prosody. So how do we express feelings through melody? Some people like to start by playing some chords, then trying to come up with a melody that sits well on top, but in my experience, that seems to limit my creativity. It's kinda easy to fall for the trap of playing only notes that sound stable against the pre-made chords, and the song may end up sounding too much like nursery rhymes. But don't get me wrong, the simplicity of nursery rhymes is amazing for pop music, really, but if the melody is all happy and perfect all the time, if there is no tension and resolution, then it's not gonna be that interesting to listen to. For me, it works better the other way around. I like to design the melody first, then experiment with different chords afterwards, using the chords to give color to the melody. The chords, the harmony, they change the mood of the melody. They provide support to emphasize the feelings we're trying to convey with the melody. And we'll have a specific video series to talk about that. So how do we make interesting and memorable melodies? The essence for me comes down to a few things. 1, it's easy to memorize and sing along. 2, it has some repetition. 3, lets you catch your breath every now and then. And 4, uses call and response. Let's talk about each one of these and listen to some examples. If a melody is too complicated and people have a hard time memorizing it and singing along, most people lose interest. The same thing happens if you're playing notes constantly and you never pause. There's no silence and people can't catch a breath. Listeners actually need a break to process each line of the melody, otherwise it's just overwhelming. And of course, a singer would run out of breath trying to sing an unstoppable melody. So that's why it's good to keep it simple. If you actively listen to a few top of the chart songs, you notice how easy it is to follow the melodies. There's usually a clear direction. Each line either goes up or down in pitch or stays around the same note. The note changes mostly happen in small intervals, like a third or a fifth at the most. For example, going from C to G. And just a few calculated note changes that happen in larger intervals for drama purposes. There's nothing keeping you from using larger intervals, like a whole octave down or up, It's art anyway. We can do whatever we want in our music. But most popular songs don't usually have big leaps where the note suddenly jumps an octave higher, except maybe something like Adele on that one impactful moment during the climax where she hits the high note and we get the goosebumps. But even her songs have pretty simple melodies and are very hummable most of the time. That's why the melody in the example song Maybe We'd Be Together is so simple most of the time. Here's what the verse sounds like.
I saw you with your boyfriend. I still have our picture in a frame. Can't believe you hurt me. I'm not the one to blame.
Besides being simple, the melodies in pop songs are repeated over and over again. The more you hear them, you have better chances of remembering, right? Just think about your favorite song and how many times it repeats the chorus. Now, how many times have you listened to that song before? You've probably heard that chorus 100 times already. That's what psychology calls the mere exposure effect. People tend to prefer things that they've been exposed to before. The more you hear it, the more you like it. Repetition is key. We just have to make small changes and variations so it doesn't bore the listener. A good rule of thumb is if you repeat a melody for the third time in a row, make sure to change something, at least the pitch of a note or the timing. Notice the amount of repetition on the last chorus of this episode's song. Now, before we talk about call and response, we need to understand tension and release, stable and unstable notes. Whenever you want your melody to sound more stable, because that supports the emotion you're trying to express with the lyrics, use notes that belong to the tonic chord of that key. For example, if your song is in the key of C major, the most stable notes in your melody will be the ones that make the C major chord, C, E, and G. The first, third, and fifth note of the scale. Those will be perfect when you're singing words that convey stable, positive feelings like happiness, peace, euphoria. But if you want to express unstable emotions, if the lyrics talk about sadness, jealousy, heartbreaks, and stuff like that, using the other notes in your melody will help you achieve that. So in the same example key of C major, the unstable notes are D, F, A, and B. The second, the fourth, sixth, and seventh note of the scale. Watch how I built the pre-chorus focused on the second and fourth notes of the scale, unstable notes, to create tension that will be released right before the next chorus hits.
You said we'd be together until the end. You promised, and we could have been smashing grapes in France or dancing.
Then when the chorus hits and I'm singing happy thoughts like smashing grapes in France and dancing in Berlin, I chose to use the fifth note of the scale, which belongs to the tonic chord. So it's super stable and reinforces the lyrics. But as soon as the idea changes to questionable things like I can't help but wonder where we could have been, the melody quickly rises to the sixth note of the scale that is tense and unstable. Then it rests on the seventh note in the end of the line, and that's the most unstable note within the scale.
Smashing grapes in France or dancing in Berlin. I just can't help but wonder where we could have been.
Not to mention that when I sing the words maybe we'd be together, the notes chosen were once again very unstable, mostly the 6th, 2nd, and 4th note of the scale. Now, one quick side note, if your melody has notes that don't belong to the chord being played, it will sound unstable too, to a certain degree, depending on the interval you're using. But we're not talking about chords and harmony yet. We'll keep it simple for now and save that for another video series. And if you want to use the most shocking notes, maybe your lyrics are about something disturbing or horrible or extremely painful or just weird and unusual, you can go outside of that scale, notes like C sharp, D sharp, and so on in the key of C major, for instance, and that will make your music sound more exotic. For a good example of this, listen to Poker Face by Lady Gaga, verse and pre-chorus. So don't limit yourself to the notes in the scale, but be careful using notes outside of the scale in your melodies. You can easily get pretty creepy, unless that's what you're aiming for. Now that we've covered the difference between stable and unstable notes, we can understand the concept of call and response. You may have noticed already that most pop music happens to be a form of conversation, and it's not just the lyrics, the melody and rhythm too. So there's this pattern where one line of melody seems to be answering the line before, like they're having a conversation, and that's why it's known as call and response. One line of melody is like a question and it creates some tension, maybe goes up in pitch and rests on an unstable note. And then the next line is the answer and resolves that tension by going down in pitch and resting on a stable note, for example. Then another question and a different answer. And each line makes the melody move towards the next one by using these micro tensions that keep the listener in constant curiosity of what comes next. That's why it's so important to use call and response in our songs. It could be done, for instance, by using a different direction and pitch for each line of the melody. Could be a different rhythm or the same melody on a different octave or even a different singer. It could be anything really. Here's an example, the added chorus towards the end of our song. Pay attention to how one line is like the call and the next line is the response. And they work in pairs even though it's just one person singing. This line is the call, this line is the response. This one is also a call, very similar to the first one, and there's an entirely different response, creating contrast and keeping things moving. Speaking of contrast, one last tip for writing pop music, create contrast among the sections of your song. So if you use a certain melody in the verse and a different one in the chorus and bridge, you're helping create that contrast. Check this entirely different melody in our example song's bridge.
Even though I broke up with you in my favorite ice cream place, told you I was dating your best friend, at least I did it face to face.
And since the chorus is often the part of the song with the most energy, it's very common in pop music to have higher pitch melodies than in the verse, so save the best for the chorus. It's not mandatory or anything, but it helps lift the energy level so that the song has a powerful chorus. And I took that into consideration when I wrote the melody for Maybe We'd Be Together. Just look at the shapes of the melodies in the verse, pre-chorus and chorus. It's visually noticeable that the chorus happens on a higher pitch range. Here's the verse. This is the pre-chorus. And this is the chorus. And watch how the notes go up in pitch. Lastly, I want to make it clear that besides these techniques and guidelines to design melodies, this task also requires lots of experimenting, trial and error, playing your melody over and over again, making small changes here and there until you're happy with the final product. I never come up with the final thing right away. It always starts with an initial idea that's extremely simple, which then gets developed into something more engaging, and it takes time and work. So don't fall in love with your first idea, alright? That's it for the first episode of How to Write a Melody for a Pop Song. I hope to see you on the next one, which will feature a brand new release. But before that, we'll start another series of videos on harmony, how to harmonize pop songs, then arrangement, production, mixing, and so on. Sound good? So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and click that like button if you learned anything today. I'm Thales, and I'll see you next time.